In 1954, a traveler stepped off a plane in Tokyo, and reality broke. He carried a passport from a country no one had ever heard of. Officials were stunned. Maps didn't show it. History didn't record it. But the documents were real. For decades, the story of the man from Taured was whispered as myth, until reports surfaced confirming the impossible. Not only was he real, what happened next was far worse than anyone dared to imagine. This isn't just another mystery. It's a chilling glimpse into something we were never meant to understand. Arrival without a past. It was a sweltering day in July 1954 when a seemingly routine arrival at Tokyo's Haneda airport became something that would puzzle officials for decades to come. Among the steady flow of businessmen, tourists, and diplomats moving through customs, one man stood out. He was sharply dressed, carried a black briefcase, and spoke fluent French and Japanese with an unmistakable European accent. On the surface, he seemed like a well-traveled professional accustomed to international borders. But what happened next would set off a chain of events so strange, so deeply unsettling, that many would later wonder whether he had ever belonged to our world at all. The man handed over his documents without hesitation, confident and polite. His passport appeared legitimate, stamped with visas from countries across Europe and Asia. The customs officer, however, paused when he glanced at the country of origin. The passport listed Taured, a nation that, as far as any map or historical record showed, simply did not exist. At first, officials assumed it was a mistake, a misunderstanding caused by translation or a typo. But the man insisted, without any sign of confusion or deceit, that Taured was real. In fact, he seemed mildly offended that they had never heard of it. Pressed for clarification, the man confidently pointed to a map, jabbing his finger between France and Spain, where the tiny principality of Andorra is located. But instead of acknowledging Andorra, he grew visibly upset, claiming that Taured had occupied that land for over 1,000 years. Airport officials tried to remain calm, but the situation quickly spiraled into something they couldn't explain. The man's supporting documents, driver's license, business papers, even a checkbook, all seemed to validate his claim, each listing Taured as his home country. Every item bore the same baffling insignia, one that no customs official had ever seen before. Worried that they were dealing with a sophisticated forgery or some kind of criminal deception, authorities decided to question him further. Yet the man's story never wavered. He spoke confidently about his company, the European offices he had visited, even the banking relationships he maintained. When officials called the company he claimed to be visiting in Tokyo, they found it existed, but no one there had ever heard of him. They called the company he claimed to work for in Taured, but no such company could be found. It was as if he had materialized from a parallel world where every detail was almost, but not quite, the same. To rule out mental illness, they asked a medical professional to observe him during the questioning. The doctor found him sane, coherent, and more confused by the situation than anyone else. His demeanor suggested a man who truly believed everything he said, and was growing more unsettled by the minute as reality refused to align with his memories. The authorities, unable to charge him with any crime but unwilling to let him move freely, placed him under guard in a hotel room for the night while they continued their investigation. As he was escorted to his temporary lodging, the man from Taured reportedly muttered to one guard that he had been through Tokyo many times before without issue, and he couldn't understand why this time was any different. It was a simple statement, almost sad in its delivery. He had no idea that he would never get the chance to explain further. For as strange as his arrival had been, what would happen next would tear apart any logical explanation. The airport staff believed they were simply dealing with a confused traveler, a case of mistaken identity. They were wrong, very wrong. The real mystery hadn't even begun yet. At first glance, the man's passport appeared beyond reproach. It was manufactured from the same materials as any European-issued document, complete with the expected seals, stamps, and watermarks. Even under ultraviolet light, nothing looked amiss. The stamps themselves told a compelling story. Entries and exits from France, Spain, Germany, and even 2 prior arrivals into Japan, all spanning the last 5 years. Each stamp matched the correct styles and dates used by customs agencies at the time. Yet there was a glaring impossibility at the center of it all. None of it should have existed. The country issuing the document, Taured, was not recognized by any nation, not listed in any treaty, and not mentioned in any historical record. Determined to find a rational explanation, airport officials brought in experts in forgery and fraud. If the passport was fake, it was a masterpiece. Every detail suggested authenticity, from the unique but consistent spelling of Taured to the dates and official signatures accompanying the visa stamps. The possibility of a con artist slipped further away with every expert who reviewed the materials and found no clear fault. What they held in their hands was an impossibility, a perfectly legitimate document from an imaginary country. The man's wallet added more confusion. It was filled with various European currencies, French francs, Spanish pesetas, German marks, all in circulation at the time, all genuine. His checkbook listed a bank no one could verify, but the formatting, ink, and paper were consistent with authentic European banks. He even carried a business card, printed in flawless Japanese, listing a company that did exist, but that had no record of employing anyone by his name. Every item he produced seemed to scream that he was telling the truth, even as logic insisted otherwise. Officials began a deeper background check. They contacted international embassies, scanned missing persons reports, and consulted with police departments across the region. No one had ever heard of him. His fingerprints yielded no matches. His handwriting was impeccable, neat and steady, suggesting no hint of nervousness. In fact, the only oddity they noted was how calm he remained throughout the ordeal. While most people would be frantic when accused of carrying fake documents, the man from Taured seemed genuinely perplexed that anyone could doubt his story. If anything, it was the world around him that seemed alien to him, not the other way around. Late into the night, officials debated what to do next. Some leaned toward releasing him after a stern warning, chalking it up to an elaborate hoax. Others weren't so sure. There were too many unanswered questions, and too much about this case that simply refused to fit any familiar pattern. In the end, caution prevailed. They decided to house him temporarily in a secure hotel room near the airport. Guards were posted outside his door, and arrangements were made to continue questioning him the next morning. Before he was escorted away, one immigration officer, perhaps out of pity, asked the man if he needed anything to make his stay more comfortable. The traveler simply shook his head and offered a faint, tired smile. "This will all be sorted out tomorrow," he said, as if assuring them as much as himself. In that moment, his confidence seemed unbreakable, almost haunting in its quiet certainty. But there would be no tomorrow for the man from Taured, not in this world. By the time officials returned to his room, they would discover that reality itself had shifted once again. What had begun as an administrative anomaly was quickly spiraling into something far beyond the reach of passports, laws, or reason. The man's arrival had been confusing enough. His disappearance would be even worse. The missing man and the vanishing proof. The hotel was modest but secure, chosen precisely because it was close enough to the airport that officials could keep the situation contained. 2 guards were stationed outside the man's door all night, instructed not to engage with him unless necessary. A 3rd officer monitored the hallway's only entrance and exit, with no balcony, no fire escape, and no open windows, just a solid, locked door. There was nowhere for him to go. Inside the room, the man from Taured was reportedly quiet. He ate a light meal, provided by hotel staff, thanked them politely, and said little else. He appeared resigned, perhaps exhausted, but still utterly convinced that the misunderstanding would be cleared up come morning. As far as anyone could tell, he settled in for the night without incident. And then, sometime between midnight and dawn, he vanished. The guards outside heard nothing. There was no disturbance, no rattling door handle, no footsteps down the hall. When immigration officials arrived early that morning to escort him back for further questioning, they found an empty room. The bed had been slept in, but there was no sign of a struggle, no broken locks, no forced windows. His few personal effects, the passport, the currencies, the checkbook, the business cards, were gone too, as if they'd been spirited away along with him. Panic set in almost immediately. The guards swore they had never left their post, and security logs confirmed no unauthorized entry or exit through the hotel's main door. A frantic search of the hotel turned up nothing. No one matching his description had been seen leaving. Airport security was alerted, roadblocks were set up, and police scoured nearby train stations and bus terminals. But the man from Taured had disappeared as silently as he had arrived, leaving behind only a growing sense of dread. Word of the event leaked quickly within official circles, though it never reached the public. Too many questions had no answers, and no one wanted to be responsible for explaining how a man could disappear from a locked room under armed guard. Internal reports described the case as deeply troubling and without precedent, language that hinted at how much the incident rattled even the most seasoned investigators. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Files were stamped with confidentiality orders. And quietly, officials decided it was better to pretend the man had never existed at all. Some of those involved, speaking years later under condition of anonymity, admitted that there was something more unsettling about the case than they had ever been allowed to acknowledge officially. A few described strange feelings that night, a sense of disorientation, as if reality itself had become slightly unmoored. Others spoke of minor malfunctions in the hotel's electrical systems, unexplained static on their radios, even odd flickers of light in the hallways. At the time, these were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. But in hindsight, they took on a much darker meaning. The disappearance of the man from Taured was not treated like an ordinary investigation. It was handled quietly, methodically erased from official records wherever possible. No public bulletin was issued. No missing persons report was filed. Instead, the incident was absorbed into a network of classified reports, forgotten, or at least hidden, by those who could not afford to admit that something utterly impossible had occurred on their watch. For decades, the story persisted only in whispers. A traveler who shouldn't have existed, a passport from a country that wasn't real, an impossible disappearance that left seasoned officials doubting the very fabric of their reality. Most dismissed it as a myth, a cautionary tale about the fallibility of memory and records. But then, years later, a new wave of documents surfaced, and with them, a chilling confirmation. The man from Taured wasn't a legend, he was real. And the truth about what happened that night was far worse than anyone had imagined. The man from Taured was real, and it was worse than we thought. For decades, the story of the man from Taured circulated in hushed tones, dismissed by skeptics as little more than an airport myth or an exaggerated urban legend. But behind the scenes, pieces of the truth were quietly being pieced together. And when long classified documents finally began to surface through discreet leaks, the whispers hardened into something far more chilling. The reports were clear, detailed, and unmistakable in their conclusion. The man from Taured was real, and it was worse than we thought. According to recent reports, the first of these documents originated from a restricted file maintained by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In dry, clinical language, the incident was referred to as an encounter with unrecognized national entity, and the descriptions matched perfectly. A European-looking man, arriving at Haneda Airport, carrying verifiable documents from a country that did not exist in recorded world history. Official notes from customs officers, painstakingly preserved, described their growing alarm at the layers of evidence the man presented. Evidence that simply should not have been possible. But the documents didn't stop there. An internal memorandum marked "Eyes Only" referenced a meeting between Japanese officials and representatives from an undisclosed foreign intelligence service. The message was chilling in its simplicity. Anomalous traveler incident confirmed. Subject and associated materials have ceased to exist within standard physical parameters. Recommend further study. In other words, not only was the man's existence acknowledged, so was the impossibility of how he had vanished. The event was no longer a rumor or myth, it exists, buried deep within official records that were never meant to see the light of day. Additional leaked files revealed that scientists affiliated with university research programs had been discreetly consulted after the event. Their conclusions were disturbing. One summary, written in precise technical language, suggested that the Haneda incident might represent a localized dimensional instability, a brief and unexplained rupture between parallel realities. The phenomenon was described as transient and unstable, but with observable consequences. In layman's terms, something tore open, and for a few brief hours, the impossible became real. The man from Taured wasn't a hoax, or a lost traveler with forged papers. He was, by every available metric, the genuine citizen of a world that didn't exist here. And when that thin window between realities slammed shut, it took him, and all traces of his life, back with it. Worse still were the follow-up notes attached to the files. Some officials believed the rupture had not been entirely random. Unconfirmed intelligence reports hinted at unusual energy readings recorded at the airport during the time of his detention. Fluctuations that couldn't be explained by ordinary equipment failures or environmental factors. A handful of researchers warned that the event at Haneda might not have been an isolated incident. It could have been part of a larger pattern, one that no one yet understood. And so the authorities buried it. Hard. The public was never told. The files were locked away. Witnesses were reassigned, silenced, or encouraged to forget. But no matter how deep they buried the evidence, the truth remained stubborn. The man from Taured was real, and what he represented was more terrifying than anyone had been prepared to face. He wasn't just a traveler from a non-existent country. He was proof that the barriers we trust to separate dreams from reality, imagination from existence, are far thinner and far weaker than we ever dared believe. Some of the scientists consulted during the aftermath later speculated, in private circles, that the event at Haneda had left scars on the fabric of reality itself, microfractures too small to measure but impossible to deny. If it happened once, they warned, it could happen again. And maybe next time it wouldn't just be one man slipping through. Cover-ups and theories. In the months following the disappearance, the Japanese government moved swiftly to scrub the incident from existence. Official reports were sealed under national security orders. Airport records were redacted. Staff involved in the case were rotated out of their posts or quietly reassigned to other cities. No public statement was ever made. No missing persons bulletin ever circulated. As far as the world was concerned, the man from Taured had never existed. But silence doesn't erase suspicion. Whispers of the event continued to circulate among airport workers, government clerks, and a handful of intelligence operatives who had been pulled into the case. Within these circles, unofficial theories began to form, some rational, others more unsettling. The most grounded explanation held that the man was the product of a highly sophisticated forgery operation, perhaps a Cold War-era espionage effort. In this view, Taured was a code word, and the confusion over his documents was an elaborate test of Japan's border security systems. Yet even the officials who favored this theory could never explain how the man had vanished under watch, or why multiple instruments malfunctioned during his detention. The more they tried to explain it through conventional means, the more holes appeared in the story. Another theory, less comfortable but harder to dismiss, argued that the man had crossed into our world by mistake, a traveler from a parallel Earth, one where the geography, politics, and history were just slightly different. Advocates of this idea pointed to the unsettling accuracy of his materials. A passport that matched real designs, currencies that matched real denominations, and personal documents that aligned with real-world standards, yet referenced non-existent institutions. It was too perfect to be fake, but too wrong to be real. Some believed the incident at Haneda wasn't isolated. Small, scattered reports began to surface over the years. Accounts of individuals who spoke fluent languages no one could identify, maps depicting territories that never existed, travelers who vanished after brief, confused appearances in airports or train stations around the world. Most of these accounts were dismissed as hoaxes or exaggerations, but those who had studied the Haneda case knew better. They saw a pattern beginning to emerge, faint but undeniable. There were also darker theories, the kind spoken of only in the most secret circles. Some insiders believed the man's arrival had not been accidental at all. Instead, they speculated that he was a scout, a fragment of a larger breach between realities that, if left unchecked, could destabilize the fragile separation between worlds. The electrical disturbances, the reports of odd sensations among the guards, the physical disappearance itself, all were seen as warning signs that reality had been briefly compromised. In this view, the cover-up wasn't just about embarrassment or national pride. It was about containment. Panic, after all, is contagious. If the public knew that the walls between worlds could thin without warning, and that no authority on Earth could stop it, the consequences would be catastrophic. Of course, without official confirmation, the event remained trapped in the gray space between myth and reality. Officially, the man from Taured was a fairy tale. Unofficially, those who had seen the original documents knew better. They knew what the leaked files later confirmed. The man from Taured was real. His disappearance wasn't a mistake, or a hoax, or a simple error. It was something else entirely. Something the world wasn't ready to face. Even now, some of the officials involved are said to carry lingering unease. A few have reportedly left cryptic remarks in private memoirs, warnings tucked between the lines. They hint at doors that should never be opened, accidents that should never be repeated, because once a boundary has been crossed, once a traveler from another world has stepped through, it's no longer a question of if it could happen again. It's only a matter of when. Echoes of Taured in our world. The man from Taured may have vanished without a trace, but the ripples he left behind never truly faded. In academic circles, the Haneda incident became an unspoken case study, whispered about in closed-door conferences on theoretical physics and extra-dimensional theory. Among conspiracy theorists, it grew into proof that alternate realities were not just science fiction, but a terrifying, unpredictable reality. And in the public imagination, it became a ghost story, a reminder that the world we know might be far less stable than we believe. Scientists who once dismissed the idea of parallel worlds have, in recent years, quietly changed their tone. Theories about multiverses, dimensional instability, and quantum slips have moved from fringe speculation into serious, if cautious, exploration. Researchers studying phenomena like the Mandela effect, mass memories of events that history says never happened, sometimes point back to the story of Taured as the first public hint that reality itself might sometimes blur, fracture, or bleed into something else. Meanwhile, reports of strange travelers, impossible maps, and sudden disappearances continue to trickle in from all corners of the world. None as public, none as well documented, but enough to keep the questions alive, enough to keep the fear just beneath the surface. If the story of the man from Taured teaches anything, it's that certainty is an illusion. The borders we trust, national, physical, even existential, are far more fragile than they appear. One moment, a man steps off a plane, confident in the country he calls home. The next, he stands in a world where that place has never existed, a living ghost in a reality that refuses to acknowledge him. Maybe the man from Taured was a singular event, a rare crack in the fabric of the universe that sealed itself forever. Or maybe it was only the first glimpse into a larger, far more chaotic truth, that our world is not singular, not solid, and not nearly as safe as we like to pretend. And somewhere, perhaps just out of reach, other travelers are still searching for a way home. What do you think really happened to the man from Taured? Was he a lost traveler from another world, or was his arrival a warning sign we still don't understand? And if reality could slip once, how would we ever know if it's happening again? Let me know your thoughts below. We'd love to hear your theories.